There is a song stuck in your head right now, or there was one an hour ago, and you did not choose it. It arrived on its own and looped a few seconds of melody while you were busy doing something else. You can reach into your pocket and summon almost every piece of music ever recorded in about 4 seconds. Your ancestors had none of that, and they made music anyway. Push the calendar back far enough, and every speaker, every string, every recording disappears. What remains is a body, a fire, and a long night that has to be filled with something. Our species has been around for roughly 300,000 years. Recorded sound has existed for about 150 of them, which means for more than 99% of our story, if you wanted music, you had to make it yourself. In a cave in southern Germany, archaeologists pulled a thin, hollow bone out of the ground. It had been carved from the wing of a vulture, drilled with finger holes, and shaped with a notched mouthpiece by someone who clearly knew what they were doing. That flute is around 40,000 years old. It was made before farming, before cities, before writing, before the last ice sheets pulled back. And when researchers built a copy and blew into it, it played. So the question is not really whether ancient humans made music. They did, and the evidence is sitting in a museum case. The real question is stranger. How far back does the singing go? Why did a species fighting to stay alive spend its energy on something that cannot be eaten? And what did that first music actually do to us? Each answer here is odder than the one before it, so stay with this. Go back with me. It is night in Ice Age Europe, and the temperature outside the cave would take your breath in seconds. Inside, a fire throws orange light on stone. A dozen people sit close together, having eaten, having survived another day. One of them lifts a hollow bone to their lips, and a sound comes out that nothing in the natural world makes. Everyone stops talking. That flute has a name in the literature. It comes from Hohle Fels, a cave in the Swabian Jura, and it was excavated in 2008 by a team led by Nicholas Cunard of the University of Tübingen. The pieces came out of the dirt separately and were fitted back together into an instrument about 22 centimeters long with 5 finger holes. The bone came from a griffin vulture, chosen because a big bird's wing bone is naturally hollow, thin-walled, and strong. Whoever made it also cut 2 deep V-shaped notches at one end to form the blowing edge, which is a detail that only makes sense if you already understand how to get a clean tone out of a tube. That last point deserves more attention than it usually gets. The Hohle Fels flute is not a first attempt. It is a competent instrument built by someone with a technique, and techniques get passed between people over long stretches of time. In the same region, in caves called Geissenklosterle and Vogelherde, researchers found other flutes, including ones carved from mammoth ivory. Ivory is not hollow, so those had to be split lengthwise, hollowed out, and then glued and sealed back together into an airtight tube. That is a multi-step manufacturing process with an adhesive, carried out 40,000 years ago by people we still picture as grunting around a fire. Germany is not alone in this either. In the French Pyrenees there is a cave called Isteritz, and it has produced around 20 bone pipes and pipe fragments, pulled from layers that span many thousands of years. One site, one long habit, generation after generation of people arriving in the same place and leaving behind the same kind of object. That is not a lucky accident preserved by chance. That is a music scene. Sit with what that implies. If the oldest instruments we can find are already this good, then the ones that came before them are gone, and the tradition behind them is much older than the objects. Bone survives when conditions are kind. Wood does not. Reed does not. Skin stretched over a hollow log does not. The instruments most people probably used have rotted away completely, and what we are left with is the small, hard, lucky fraction. Which raises an obvious and uncomfortable possibility. If flutes were already mature 40,000 years ago, were other kinds of humans making them too? That question runs straight into one of the strangest arguments in archaeology. In 1995, at a site called Divje Babe in Slovenia, a team led by Ivan Turk found a fragment of a young cave bear's thigh bone with 2 clean holes in it, and possibly parts of 2 more. The layer it came from is roughly 50 to 60,000 years old, which places it in Neanderthal territory, well before modern humans arrived in that part of Europe. If the holes were made on purpose, it is the oldest musical instrument on Earth, and it was not made by us. The objections came quickly, and they were serious. Researchers including Francesco De Rico and April Noel argued that carnivores make holes exactly like these when they bite through a bone, and that a hyena's teeth can puncture a thigh bone in a suspiciously musical pattern. Supporters, including Mattia Turk, who continued the work, pointed to the spacing, the shape of the rims, and experiments with animal bites that struggled to reproduce the same result. The argument has run for 30 years, and it is not finished. A single broken bone in a Slovenian cave is still holding open the question of whether Neanderthals sat in the dark and played. Set the objects down for a moment, because there is a much older instrument that leaves no trace at all. You are carrying it. The human voice is the first and cheapest instrument, and it needs no workshop. Before anyone drilled a hole in anything, people could hum, sing, whistle, click, and shout across a valley. They could clap, slap their thighs, stomp the ground, and knock two rocks together in time. None of that fossilizes. A song made of voices and hands leaves exactly as much archaeological evidence as a conversation does, which is to say none, and it could be 100,000 years older than any flute without leaving us a single clue. Percussion hides in the same blind spot, and occasionally it slips out. At a site called Mazin in Ukraine, roughly 20,000 years old, excavators found a set of mammoth bones inside a dwelling, painted with red ochre and worn in ways that are hard to explain by ordinary butchery. The archaeologist Sergei Bibikov argued they were struck, and that what he had uncovered was a percussion ensemble, a shoulder blade and a hip bone, and a jaw doing the work of drums. Not everyone accepts the reading. But nobody has a better explanation for why you would decorate a mammoth's shoulder blade and then batter it in one specific spot. Caves offer another possibility. In some decorated caves, including Nerja in Spain, certain stalactites and rock columns carry marks and damage in exactly the places where striking them produces a clear ringing note. Hit stone in the right spot, and it behaves like a bell. If those marks mean what some researchers think they mean, then people were not only singing underground, they were playing the cave itself. There is a small physical hint, though. Neanderthals had a hyoid bone, the small floating bone that anchors the tongue and larynx, and the one found at Kibara Cave in Israel looks close to ours. That does not prove they sang, and honest researchers say so, but it removes one of the old excuses for assuming they could not. So we have the objects, and we have a voice that leaves no objects. What we do not yet have is a reason. Why would a species living close to the edge, burning calories it could not always replace, spend its evenings making organized noise? Here's where the caves themselves start talking. A French musicologist named Igor Reznikov spent years doing something almost nobody thought to try. He walked through decorated Paleolithic caves in France, singing and calling at intervals, and mapping where the sound came alive. Caves are acoustically wild places. Some spots swallow your voice, and some throw it back at you multiplied, resonant, and strangely alive. When he compared his acoustic map to the locations of the paintings, the two lined up more often than chance allows. The animals on the walls cluster in the places where the rock sings back. Think about what that would have felt like. You are deep underground with a small flame, the passage is narrow and cold, and you make a sound. The rock answers in a voice that is yours and not yours. There is a real argument that some of the earliest religion and some of the earliest art grew out of exactly this moment, with people painting where the cave answered, because the answer felt like something living in the stone. Whether or not they thought a spirit lived down there, they were doing what every band since has done. They found the room with the best acoustics, and they played in it. There is one more thing your body does with music that almost nothing else on earth can manage. You can keep a beat. Put on a song and your foot starts tapping without being asked, and you lock onto a pulse you have never heard before within a couple of seconds. Most mammals cannot do this at all. A dog will never nod along. Research by Anirudh Patel and others found the ability turning up in a small and surprising club, mostly creatures that learn their vocalizations, including certain parrots. Whatever wiring lets a human infant bounce in time is rare, it is deep, and it means a group of people can synchronize their bodies through sound alone. Once 40 people can move as one, you have something no other primate on the planet has. Now the bigger question: what is music actually for? One well-known answer, associated with the psychologist Steven Pinker, is deflating on purpose. He suggested that music might be an evolutionary accident, a pleasurable byproduct that presses buttons built for other things, the way a dessert exploits taste systems evolved for real nutrition. On this view, music does nothing for survival directly. It simply feels good because of how our brains are wired for language, emotion, and pattern. Plenty of researchers think that undersells it badly, and the strongest counter-argument comes from group size. The anthropologist Robin Dunbar has spent decades on how primates hold groups together. Most primates bond by grooming, picking through each other's fur, and grooming works beautifully in small groups. The problem is arithmetic. Grooming is one-to-one, so as a group grows, the time cost explodes until there are not enough hours in the day. Human groups grew far past that ceiling. Dunbar's argument is that we found ways to groom many people at once, and that singing and moving together is one of the best of them. Singing in a group releases endorphins, the same chemistry that grooming triggers, and it does it to everyone in the room simultaneously. 20 people around a fire, breathing in the same rhythm, hitting the same beat, walk away from that fire more willing to share food and take risks for each other. That is not a decoration on top of survival. In a world where being alone was the most dangerous condition available, a technology that made 40 strangers feel like one group was worth more than a better spear. You already know this works, by the way. It is why armies march in step, why crowds in stadiums sing, why every protest turns into a chant. Nobody had to teach us. We just kept doing the thing that worked 40,000 years ago and gave it new names. There is a second answer, and it is quieter. It starts with babies. The psychologist Sandra Treehub spent her career studying how infants respond to music, and the findings are consistent in a way that is almost eerie. Babies far too young for language track melody and rhythm closely. They calm down more reliably to a sung lullaby than to the same words spoken. Mothers across wildly different cultures, with no contact between them, sing to infants in a shape that is recognizably the same, higher in pitch, slower, warmer, and more repetitive than ordinary speech. Follow that thread and music stops looking like a luxury. A parent with a crying infant in a landscape full of things with excellent hearing has a very practical problem. A parent whose hands are busy has another one. Singing solves both. It soothes a child from a distance. It says, "I am still here," without needing to be there. And it works before a baby understands a single word. Every person in this story was once that baby, which means the first music any of us ever hears is still the oldest kind. If all of that is true, music should not be a local invention. It should be everywhere. So somebody checked. A team including Samuel Mayer and Manveer Singh built a project called The Natural History of Song, gathering ethnographic descriptions and recordings from hundreds of societies around the world. Their 2019 results were striking. They found no society without music. Songs everywhere cluster into recognizable behavioral categories, including healing songs, dance songs, love songs, and lullabies. Then they ran the test that matters. They played songs to listeners who had no connection to the culture that produced them, and those listeners could identify what a song was for at rates well above chance. A stranger can hear a lullaby from the other side of the planet and know it is meant for a child. That is a strange and lovely fact. Language stops at the border of a language. Song does not, entirely. The healing category deserves a closer look, because it shows what this could have looked like in practice. Among the Juhoansi of the Kalahari, whose way of life gives us one of our closest windows onto foraging societies, the central ritual is a dance that can run all night. Women sit in a ring around the fire, clapping complex interlocking patterns and singing, while men dance in a circle around them for hours. As the rhythm builds, some of the dancers enter an altered state that the anthropologist Richard Katz spent years documenting. And in that state, they move through the group, laying hands on people, drawing out sickness, arguments, and grief. Nobody is a spectator. The whole camp is inside the sound. Look at what that single event accomplishes. It treats the sick, it settles quarrels, it exhausts everyone into calm, it teaches the young the songs, and it does all of it at once, powered by nothing more than voices, hands, and a fire. If you were designing a technology for holding a small group of humans together through a hard winter, you would struggle to beat it. Now step forward in time, because the story does not stop with cave flutes. In a village called Jiahu in central China, archaeologists working with Zhuzhongjiang recovered flutes made from the wing bones of red-crowned cranes, dating to roughly 9,000 years ago. Several survived intact. They have 5, 6, 7, and 8 holes. They were clearly refined over generations, and they are tuned. Researchers played one. 9,000 years after somebody drilled it, that flute produced a scale you would recognize. Sit with that for a second. A person with a name we will never know worked out where to put the holes so the notes would land right, and their arithmetic still holds. Their village is gone, their language is gone, their gods are gone, and the tuning survived. Thousands of years after that, somebody finally worked out how to keep a melody without keeping the player. In the ruins of Ugarit, on the coast of what is now Syria, archaeologists recovered clay tablets carrying instructions for a 9-stringed lyre, written roughly 3,400 years ago. The scholar Anne Draftcorn Kilmer spent years reconstructing how those instructions map onto notes. Researchers still argue about the details, and different reconstructions sound noticeably different from each other. Yet the principle is settled, and it is enormous. Someone in the Bronze Age looked at a song, understood that it was made of parts that could be described, and wrote it down so that a stranger could play it after they were gone. Which brings up the biggest possibility of all, and the one that is hardest to test. What if music did not come after language? What if it came first? Charles Darwin raised this in 1871. He noticed that many animals use song in courtship and competition, and he suggested that our ancestors may have used musical sounds, pitch, rhythm, and emotional tone before they had words with fixed meanings. On that view, early humans sang whole feelings at each other, and language slowly crystallized out of the singing as those sounds got chopped into repeatable units with agreed definitions. Some modern researchers have taken this seriously under the label of musical proto-language. It is genuinely hard to prove, and plenty of linguists disagree. But look at how you actually talk. Strip the words out of an argument you overhear through a wall, and you can still tell what is happening from the melody alone. Say the word fine in 3 different tones, and you have said 3 different things. The musical layer under your speech carries an enormous amount of the meaning, and babies read that layer long before they read the words. Whatever the historical order turns out to be, the singing part of language is not decoration sitting on top. It is load-bearing. Pull all of it together, and a picture forms that is very different from the one most people carry. Our ancestors were not silent people huddled in the dark waiting for civilization to arrive with entertainment. They had rhythm, they had melody, they had instruments good enough to require training, they had rooms chosen for their acoustics, and they had songs for calming children, for healing, for dancing, and for reminding 40 cold and frightened people that they belonged to each other. They also had something we mostly gave away. For nearly all of human history, music was a thing you did, and everyone did it. You sang because it was the evening, and there were no professionals to compare yourself against, and no possibility of pressing a button and hearing someone better. The idea that music is made by a small group of gifted specialists, while the rest of us listen, is about as old as recording technology, which is to say, it is a blink. So here is the last thought, and it is a practical one. That song in your head is running on equipment older than agriculture, older than writing, older by far than any nation on the map. Somewhere upstream of you, a person sat in firelight with a hollow bird bone and worked out where to put the holes, and the reason you can hum it all is that the habit never broke. There is a song stuck in your head right now, and you did not choose it, and neither did they.